The air hung heavy with diesel fumes and the sharp tang of gun oil as Clara Vance stood rigid at the edge of the Fort Ramsey parade ground. Her boots, polished to a mirror sheen, sank slightly into the frost-kissed grass. The morning sun sliced through the Colorado pines, casting long shadows that stretched like accusations across the field. No one asked her name, but the whispers of her presence, a civilian woman in a tailored Marine Corps uniform, slithered through the ranks of gathered soldiers like a cold wind. Clara's jaw tightened as a sergeant's bark cut the air. "Eyes front!" The troops snapped to attention, but their glances lingered, sharp and dismissive. Her uniform, a relic of her brother's service, fit her frame with precision, the name tape Vance stitched in silver thread above her breast pocket. The fabric carried the faint scent of cedar from the chest where it had been stored since his death in Fallujah. She wore it not for pride, but for penance, a silent vow to carry his weight, his honor, his unfulfilled promise. Across the field, Master Sergeant Roy Cutler leaned against a Humvee, his broad frame casting a shadow that swallowed the recruits nearby. At 42, Cutler was a fixture at Fort Ramsey, his voice a gravelly hymn of authority that could silence a mess hall with a single word. His eyes, narrowed beneath a graying buzz cut, fixed on Clara. "What's this?" he called, his tone laced with mockery. "Some city girl playing dress-up in a dead man's clothes?" The words landed like a slap. Clara's fingers twitched at her sides, but her face remained a mask of stone. She had anticipated this. Judgment was the currency of places like Fort Ramsey, where respect was earned through sweat and scars. Still, the insult stung, not for her sake, but for the name she carried. Her brother, Captain Eli Vance, had been a Marine sniper, a ghost in the desert who saved lives with every silent shot. His uniform was no costume. It was a testament. Cutler strode toward her, his boots crunching gravel, his smirk widening as the recruits snickered. "You lost, sweetheart?" he asked, stopping just close enough for her to smell the coffee on his breath. "This ain't a museum." "That uniform don't belong on you." Clara met his gaze, her hazel eyes unyielding. "It belonged to my brother, sir," she said, her voice low but steady, each word deliberate. "Captain Eli Vance." KIA, Iraq, 2018. The murmurs among the recruits faltered, replaced by an uneasy silence. Cutler's smirk didn't fade, but his eyes flickered, reassessing. "A hero's sister, huh?" he said, his tone mocking but less certain. "And what's that make you, some kind of wannabe? You think wearing his clothes makes you a Marine?" Her silence was her shield. She could have told him about the years she spent training in Eli's shadow, hours at the range, her hands blistered from recoil, her ears ringing with his lessons. She could have mentioned the medals tucked away in her apartment, earned in civilian shooting competitions where she outshot men twice her size. But words were cheap here. Fort Ramsey was a place of action, of proof. The moment stretched, taut as a bowstring. Then Clara's gaze shifted past Cutler to the distant firing range, its steel targets glinting under the rising sun. "If you doubt my right to wear this," she said, her voice cutting through the morning chill, "let me show you what he taught me." Cutler laughed, a harsh bark that echoed off the barracks. "You hear that, boys?" he called to the recruits. "Little lady thinks she can shoot like a Marine." The laughter spread, but it was thinner now, laced with curiosity. Cutler crossed his arms, his bulk a wall of skepticism. "All right, Vance, you want to play soldier?" "Range is open. Let's see if you can hit anything besides your own ego." Clara's heart pounded, but her face betrayed nothing. She nodded once, a gesture as precise as a salute, and turned toward the range. The recruits parted, their whispers trailing her like smoke. She felt their eyes, some mocking, some intrigued, all waiting for her to fail. The wind carried the scent of pine and gunpowder, grounding her as she walked. This was not about pride. It was about Eli, about proving his lessons lived in her bones. The firing range sprawled across a valley, its concrete bunkers and steel targets a stark contrast to the wild Colorado terrain. Captain Lena Torres, the range officer, looked up from her clipboard as Clara approached, flanked by Cutler and a growing crowd of soldiers. Torres, a wiry woman in her 30s with a scar tracing her jaw, raised an eyebrow. "Sergeant Cutler," she said, her voice clipped. "What's this about? Civilians don't shoot on my range." Cutler grinned, jerking a thumb at Clara. "This one claims she's got sniper blood. Says her brother taught her how to shoot. I say let her try." "Show us what a city girl's made of." Torres studied Clara, her gaze lingering on the uniform, the name tape, the quiet intensity in her posture. "That true?" she asked, her tone neutral but probing. "You trained by a Marine?" "Yes, ma'am," Clara said. "My brother was Captain Eli Vance. He taught me everything he knew." The name sparked recognition in Torres's eyes. She had heard of Vance, a legend among snipers, a man whose precision saved dozens in ambushes. Her expression softened, but only for a moment. "All right," she said, setting down her clipboard. "You get one chance." "Standard M4 carbine, 100 meters, 5 shots. Show me you're not wasting my time." Clara nodded, her movements calm but deliberate. She stepped to the firing line, the weight of the crowd's scrutiny pressing against her. The M4 felt familiar in her hands, its cold metal an extension of her will. She settled into a prone position, her body aligning with the earth, her breathing slowing to a rhythm Eli had drilled into her. Inhale, exhale, hold, squeeze. The first shot cracked through the morning air, the sound sharp against the valley's silence. The steel target pinged, a clean hit dead center. The crowd stilled. Clara fired again, then again, each shot a precise echo of the last. 5 rounds, 5 pings, the target's bullseye obliterated by a grouping so tight it seemed impossible. Torres lowered her binoculars, her face unreadable but her eyes wide. 5 rounds, 1-inch group at 100 meters, she announced, her voice carrying a note of disbelief. Expert-level shooting. The silence that followed was heavier than the diesel fumes, thicker than the frost. Cutler's smirk was gone, replaced by a tightness in his jaw. The recruits exchanged glances, their mockery replaced by awe. Clara rose, her movements fluid, and handed the rifle back to Torres. She said nothing, but her eyes found Cutler's, holding his gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary. Torres stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "Ms. Vance," she said, "that was no fluke. I've seen trained snipers struggle to match that. Who the hell are you?" Clara's lips twitched, the ghost of a smile. "Just a sister keeping a promise," she said softly. But her words carried a weight that silenced the crowd. A promise not just to Eli, but to herself. To prove her worth. To claim her place. To bear the name Vance with the quiet strength it demanded. As the crowd dispersed, Cutler lingered, his posture stiff, his eyes avoiding Clara's. She turned to leave, the sun warming her back, when Torres called after her. "Vance," she said, her voice low but firm. "Stick around. We need to talk." Clara paused, her hand brushing the name tape on her chest. The day had shifted, the ground beneath her no longer frost-kissed, but alive with possibility. She had come to honor a memory. Now something else was stirring. A recognition. A challenge. A door cracking open to a future she hadn't dared imagine. The Fort Ramsey Range Control Tower smelled of old coffee and gun grease, its concrete walls absorbing the late morning sun. Clara Vance sat on a metal folding chair, her brother's Marine uniform still crisp, despite the dust clinging to her boots. Across the scratched wooden table, Captain Lena Torres leaned forward, her scar catching the light through a narrow window. The air between them crackled with unspoken questions, the weight of Clara's earlier performance on the range hanging like smoke. Torres tapped a pen against her clipboard, her dark eyes studying Clara with the precision of a sniper sizing up a target. "You didn't just shoot out there," she said, her voice low, deliberate. "You performed. 5 shots, 1-inch group at 100 meters. That's not hobbyist shooting." "That's training. Discipline. So tell me, Vance, who are you really?" Clara's fingers brushed the silver name tape on her chest, the word Vance a tether to her brother's memory. She wanted to answer simply, to say she was just a sister honoring Eli, but the truth was messier. Her life was a tangle of grief and grit, years spent at civilian ranges, her hands calloused from Eli's old rifles, her nights haunted by his letters from Fallujah. She had built herself in his image, not for glory, but to keep him alive. Yet here, under Torres' gaze, that truth felt too raw, too heavy to lay bare. "My brother taught me," Clara said, her voice steady but quiet, each word chosen with care. "He was a Marine sniper." "Captain Eli Vance. Before he died, he made sure I knew how to shoot, how to think under pressure. I've been practicing ever since." Torres's expression softened, but only slightly. She leaned back, crossing her arms. "I knew of Eli Vance. His name's in the unit histories. 2nd Battalion, 7th Marines, saved a platoon in an ambush, took out 3 insurgents at 600 meters in a sandstorm. A legend." Her eyes narrowed. "But legends don't teach civilians to shoot like that, not without a reason. What was his?" Clara's jaw tightened. She saw Eli's face in her mind, his crooked grin, the way his eyes lit up when he talked about the Corps. He had trained her not because he saw war in her future, but because he believed in her strength. "He said I had his eyes," she said softly. "Said I could see things others missed. He wanted me to be ready, for anything, even after he was gone." The room fell silent, the only sound the distant pop of gunfire from the range. Torres studied Clara, her gaze piercing but not unkind. "You're not just carrying his uniform," she said. "You're carrying his fight." "But Fort Ramsey isn't a place for personal crusades. You step onto my range, you're playing with military stakes. You understand that?" Clara nodded, her posture rigid. "Yes, ma'am." Torres set her clipboard down, the motion deliberate. "Good, because what you did out there got attention. Master Sergeant Cutler's already talking, and not just to the recruits. By noon, half the base will know a civilian woman in a Marine uniform outshot their best marksman. That's a problem, or an opportunity. Depends on you." Before Clara could respond, the door swung open, and Master Sergeant Roy Cutler filled the frame. His broad shoulders seemed to shrink the room, his scowl deepening as his eyes landed on Clara. "Captain," he said, his voice a low growl, "we got a situation." "Colonel Hargrove's on his way. Heard about the civilian shooting up the range. He's not happy." Torres's face hardened, but her voice stayed even. "Noted, Sergeant. I'll handle the colonel. You got anything to add about Mrs. Vance's performance?" Cutler's gaze flicked to Clara, his jaw working as if chewing on words he didn't want to spit out. "She shot well," he said, the admission grudging. "Better than most of my recruits." "But letting civilians handle military weapons sets a bad precedent. Regulations exist for a reason." Clara's fingers curled into her palms, but she kept her silence. She felt the weight of Cutler's judgment, his need to reassert control after her display had shaken his authority. Yet beneath his bluster, she sensed something else, uncertainty, maybe even respect, buried deep. Torres stood, her chair scraping the floor. "Regulations also say we recognize talent, Sergeant." "Ms. Vance isn't some kid playing with a BB gun. She's trained. Skilled. And she's got a name that carries weight. You dismissed that name this morning." "Care to explain why?" Cutler's face reddened, but he held his ground. I saw a civilian in a uniform she didn't earn. Thought she was mocking the Corps. Didn't know about her brother. Next time, ask before you assume, Torres said, her tone sharp. Now get back to your recruits. I'll deal with Hargrove. Cutler hesitated, his eyes lingering on Clara for a moment longer than necessary. Then he turned and left, the door slamming behind him. The sound echoed like a gunshot, leaving Clara and Torres in a charged silence. Torres sighed, rubbing her temple. Hargrove's old school. He'll see you as a liability, civilian, female, wearing a Marine uniform. He's not wrong about the optics. But I saw what you did out there, Vance. You're no liability. You're a damn asset. She paused, her gaze softening. Question is, what do you want from this? You came to honor your brother. You've done that. So what's next? Clara's throat tightened. She hadn't planned beyond this morning, beyond proving she could carry Eli's legacy. But Torres's question opened a door she hadn't dared approach. What did she want? To keep shooting, yes, but not just for herself. To teach, maybe, like Eli had taught her. To show others what she'd learned in the quiet hours, when grief and determination forged her into something more. I want to keep going, Clara said, her voice firm despite the uncertainty roiling inside. Not just for Eli, but for what I can do. If Fort Ramsey has a place for that, I'm listening. Torres nodded, a faint smile tugging at her lips. All right, but Hargrove's coming, and he's not the type to hand out gold stars. You want a place here, you'll need to prove it again, to him, to the base, to yourself. Can you handle that? Clara's eyes met Torres's unyielding. Yes, ma'am. The captain stood, motioning for Clara to follow. Then let's move. Hargrove's office is across base. We've got 10 minutes to prep you for the fight of your life. As they stepped into the Colorado sunlight, the air sharp with pine and frost, Clara felt the ground shift beneath her. The parade ground stretched before her, no longer a place of judgment, but a battlefield where she'd already drawn first blood. Hargrove was coming, and with him, a reckoning. She touched the name tape on her chest, Eli's presence steadying her. This was no longer just about proving herself. It was about claiming a legacy and a future she hadn't known she could fight for. The Fort Ramsey headquarters building loomed like a squat fortress, its brick facade weathered by decades of Colorado winters. Clara Vance followed Captain Lena Torres through the double doors, the air inside thick with the scent of floor wax and stale cigarette smoke. Her brother's Marine uniform, still pristine despite the morning's trials, felt heavier now, as if the silver name tape Vance carried the weight of every skeptical glance she'd endured. The corridor buzzed with activity, clerks shuffling papers, officers barking orders, but Clara's focus narrowed to the polished oak door at the far end, where Colonel Nathan Hargrove waited. Torres paused outside the door, her scar glinting under the fluorescent lights as she turned to Clara. Hargrove's a hard ass, she said, her voice low, urgent. 30 years in the Army, 2 tours in Iraq. He values tradition over talent, and you're a civilian in a Marine uniform. That's 2 strikes before you open your mouth. Speak only when asked, and keep it tight. You're not here to win him over. You're here to survive him. Clara nodded, her jaw tight. Her hands, steady on the range, trembled faintly now, but she clasped them behind her back, channeling Eli's lessons. Fear is just noise. Focus through it. She had faced Cutler's mockery and silenced the range with her shots. Hargrove was just another target, harder to hit, but not impossible. Torres knocked twice, sharp and precise. A gravelly voice answered, "Enter!" The door swung open, revealing a room dominated by a mahogany desk and walls lined with framed citations. Colonel Hargrove sat behind the desk, his silver hair cropped close, his eyes like chipped flint. At 55, he carried the bearing of a man who had seen war's cost and measured every soul against it. His gaze raked over Clara, lingering on her uniform, the name tape, the absence of rank. His lips thinned, but he said nothing, gesturing to a chair. Clara sat, her posture rigid, while Torres stood at parade rest by the door. The silence stretched, heavy as the diesel fumes on the parade ground. Hargrove leaned back, his chair creaking, and steepled his fingers. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice low, deliberate, "you've caused quite a stir. A civilian firing military weapons on my range, wearing a uniform you didn't earn." "Explain yourself." Clara's pulse quickened, but her voice held steady. "Sir, I wore my brother's uniform to honor him. Captain Eli Vance, Marine sniper, killed in Fallujah 2018. He trained me to shoot. I asked to demonstrate what he taught me after Sergeant Cutler questioned my right to wear it." Hargrove's eyes narrowed, a flicker of recognition at Eli's name, but his expression remained stone. "Honor's a fine word, Ms. Vance, but it doesn't justify breaking protocol. Civilians don't handle M4s. Civilians don't wear military uniforms on my base. You think your brother's name gives you a pass?" "No, sir," Clara said, her tone even, though her chest tightened. "I think my performance on the range speaks for itself. 5 shots, 1-inch group at 100 meters. Captain Torres verified it." Torres shifted slightly, her presence a quiet anchor. Hargrove's gaze flicked to her, then back to Clara. "I've read the report," he said. "Impressive, for a civilian. But this isn't a shooting club. Fort Ramsey trains soldiers, not hobbyists. Your brother was a Marine. You're not. Why should I care about your marksmanship?" The question cut deeper than Cutler's mockery. Clara saw Eli's face, his grin after her first bullseye, his voice steady as he taught her to breathe through the trigger. She could retreat, apologize, fade back to her quiet life. But that would betray Eli's lessons, his belief in her strength. She leaned forward just enough to meet Hargrove's stare. "Because talent doesn't care about rank or status, sir. I shot better than most of your recruits. If Fort Ramsey values excellence, I can contribute. Not as a soldier, but as someone who knows what a rifle can do in the right hands." Hargrove's brow furrowed, a crack in his armor, but his voice stayed cold. "Bold words. But you're a liability. One civilian with a rifle can spark chaos, media, lawsuits, worse. You want to play Marine? Prove you're more than a one-trick pony. Captain Torres, set up a stress shoot, 300 meters, variable conditions, tomorrow morning. If Ms. Vance can't deliver under pressure, she's off my base." Torres nodded, her face unreadable. "Yes, sir." Clara's stomach knotted, but she kept her expression neutral. A stress shoot, timed, with environmental factors like wind and movement, was a soldier's test, not a civilian's. Hargrove was betting she'd crack. She rose, saluting out of instinct, though she had no rank. "Thank you for the opportunity, sir." Hargrove's eyes flickered, surprised by the gesture, but he waved her out. "Dismissed." Outside, the air hit Clara like a slap, sharp with pine and frost. Torres fell into step beside her, her boots crunching gravel. "You held your own," she said, a note of respect in her voice. "But Hargrove's not bluffing. A 300-meter stress shoot is brutal. Wind's picking up tomorrow, and he'll have Cutler watching like a hawk. You ready for that?" Clara's mind raced. Wind drift, bullet drop, the weight of 100 eyes. But she saw Eli's hands guiding hers, his voice calm. "Trust your training." "I've shot in worse," she said, her voice firm. "I'll be ready." Torres stopped, turning to face her. "You're not just fighting for yourself out there, Vance. You're fighting for every overlooked soul who's got something to prove. Don't let Hargrove's shadow bury you." The words settled like a challenge, heavier than the uniform. Clara nodded, her hazel eyes glinting with resolve. As Torres walked away, Clara lingered, the base sprawling before her. Barracks, ranges, a world built on discipline and doubt. Tomorrow she'd face the stress shoot, not just for Eli, but for the part of herself she'd kept hidden. The woman who could aim true, even when the world aimed back. The pre-dawn air at Fort Ramsey bit like a blade, carrying the scent of wet pine and cordite across Eagle's Crest Range. Clara Vance stood at the firing line, her brother's Marine uniform a quiet defiance against the gray light. The wind gusted, tugging at her collar, whispering doubts she refused to hear. Her hands, steady despite the chill, gripped the M4 carbine, its weight a familiar anchor. Around her the range hummed with tension, soldiers, officers, and Master Sergeant Roy Cutler's looming presence, his scowl a storm cloud on the horizon. Captain Lena Torres paced nearby, her scar pale against her jaw as she checked the range setup. The 300-meter stress shoot was no standard test. Targets, smaller than dinner plates, stood against a backdrop of rocky ridges. Wind flags fluttered erratically, signaling gusts of 7 to 10 miles per hour, left to right. The course demanded 5 shots in under 90 seconds, with movement between positions, prone, kneeling, standing, simulating combat's chaos. Clara's performance would either silence her doubters or prove Colonel Hargrove's point. Civilians didn't belong here. Torres stopped beside her, voice low. "Wind's a beast today, Vance." Bullet drops significant at 300 meters, and those gusts'll push your shots wide if you don't compensate. You've got one run. Hargrove's watching from the tower. "Don't give him an excuse to bury you." Clara nodded, her hazel eyes fixed on the distant targets. Eli's voice echoed in her mind. "See the wind, feel the shot." She'd trained for this, not on military ranges, but in the open fields of Wyoming, where her brother taught her to read breezes by the bend of grass. She adjusted her stance, the uniform's name tape, Vance, glinting faintly. This was for him, for the lessons carved into her bones. Cutler's voice barked from the sidelines. "Range is hot! Shooter, prepare!" His tone carried a grudge, his earlier humiliation on the parade ground still raw. The gathered soldiers, recruits, NCOs, a few curious officers, watched with a mix of skepticism and intrigue. Clara felt their eyes, heavy as the frost on the ground, but she shut them out. The world narrowed to the rifle, the target, the wind. Torres gave the signal. "Begin!" Clara dropped to prone, her body aligning with the earth. Her cheek pressed against the stock, cold metal grounding her. The first target loomed through the scope, its scoring rings a faint challenge. She exhaled, held, and squeezed. The rifle cracked, the shot swallowed by the wind. A distant ping confirmed the hit. She rose, moving to the kneeling position, her boots slipping slightly on loose gravel. The second shot followed, then the third, each deliberate, each fighting the gusts that clawed at her aim. Time pressed like a vice. She shifted to standing, the least stable position, her legs braced against the wind. The fourth target blurred briefly as a gust stung her eyes, but she blinked it away, recalculating. 2 minutes right, she thought, adjusting for drift. The shot rang out, another ping. One left. Her heart pounded, but her hand stayed steady. The final target seemed to taunt her, swaying in the scope. She fired, the sound sharp against the valley's silence. "Cease fire!" Torres called. The stopwatch clicked off. 87 seconds. Clara lowered the rifle, her breath visible in the cold. The crowd was silent, the only sound the wind's low moan. Torres raised her binoculars, scanning the targets. Her face, usually unreadable, betrayed a flicker of awe. 5 hits, she announced, her voice carrying to the tower. Group size, 2 inches at 300 meters, expert level under stress conditions. The words landed like a shockwave. Recruits exchanged glances, their murmurs rising. Cutler's jaw tightened, his arms crossed so tightly his knuckles whitened. From the control tower, Colonel Hargrove's silhouette was visible, motionless, a judge weighing her fate. Clara stood tall, the M4 handed back to Torres with care. She said nothing, but her eyes found Cutler's, holding them briefly. A silent challenge answered. Torres approached, her voice low. "That was damn near perfect, Vance. Hargrove can't ignore this, but he's not the only one watching." She nodded toward a new figure approaching from the tower, a woman in her late 40s, her uniform crisp, her stride purposeful. Major Diane Kessler, Hargrove's executive officer, carried an air of quiet authority, her dark hair pulled back in a severe bun. "Ms. Vance," Kessler said, her voice measured but warm. "Colonel Hargrove requests your presence in his office, now." Her eyes flicked to Torres, a silent acknowledgement, then back to Clara. "That was remarkable shooting." "Your brother would be proud." Clara's throat tightened at the mention of Eli, but she nodded. "Thank you, ma'am." As she followed Kessler across the range, the wind at her back, she felt the weight of the moment. The stress shoot had been her crucible, and she'd emerged unscathed, stronger, even. But Hargrove's office was another battlefield, one where bullets wouldn't help. She touched the name tape, grounding herself. Eli had faced worse. So could she. The headquarters corridor was quieter now, the morning's bustle replaced by an eerie calm. Kessler led her to Hargrove's door, knocking once before opening it. The colonel stood by the window, his back to them, hands clasped behind him. The room felt smaller, the air thick with the scent of old leather and authority. "Sit," Hargrove said without turning. Clara obeyed, her posture rigid. Kessler remained by the door, a silent observer. Hargrove faced her, his flinty eyes unreadable. "You surprised me, Ms. Vance," he said, his tone grudging. 2-inch group at 300 meters under stress with variable wind. "Most of my officers can't match that, but skill doesn't erase the problem. You're a civilian." "A wild card. Fort Ramsey isn't your playground." Clara's fingers dug into her thighs, but her voice stayed calm. "I'm not here to play, sir. I'm here to honor my brother's legacy. If my skills can serve Fort Ramsey, I'll prove it, any way you ask." Hargrove's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "You've got grit, I'll give you that. But this base runs on order, not exceptions. Major Kessler thinks you're worth a closer look. She's got a proposal." He nodded to Kessler, who stepped forward, a folder in hand. "Ms. Vance," Kessler said, her voice steady, "your performance suggests potential beyond personal achievement. The Army's exploring civilian mentorship programs, training young recruits with exceptional talent. Your marksmanship and composure make you a candidate. It's not a soldier's role, but a civilian instructor's. Limited scope, weekend sessions, under Captain Torres's oversight." "Are you interested?" Clara's breath caught. A role at Fort Ramsey, not as a soldier, but as herself, teaching what Eli had given her. It was more than she'd dared hope, yet the weight of it pressed against her. She saw Eli's grin, heard his voice. "Teach them to see, Clara." "Yes, ma'am," she said, her voice firm. "I'm interested." Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "This isn't a done deal. You'll need to pass a formal evaluation, background checks, range tests, interviews. One misstep and you're out." "Understood?" "Understood, sir," Clara said, meeting his gaze. He waved her out. "Dismissed." "Major, set it up." Outside, the sun climbed higher, burning off the frost. Kessler walked with Clara, her tone softer now. "You've got a chance, Vance." "Don't waste it. Torres will prep you for the evaluation. It's in 2 weeks. Show them what you showed us today." Clara nodded, the path ahead clearer but no less daunting. As Kessler left, she stood alone, the range stretching before her, its targets silent witnesses to her triumph. The wind carried a new scent, possibility, sharp and clean. She had faced the crucible and won. Now, a greater test loomed, not just to shoot, but to teach, to carve a place in a world that had doubted her. For Eli, for herself. The Fort Ramsey training grounds shimmered under a midday sun, the Colorado heat bending the air above the asphalt. Clara Vance stood at the edge of a makeshift classroom, a corrugated metal shed repurposed for marksmanship briefings. Her brother's Marine uniform, now a familiar weight, felt less like armor and more like skin after weeks of scrutiny. Inside, a dozen recruits, young, eager, their fatigues still stiff with newness, sat on benches, their eyes flicking between curiosity and doubt. Clara's task today was her first as a potential civilian instructor, a dry-fire session to teach sight alignment and trigger control. The evaluation loomed in 10 days, and Captain Lena Torres watched from the back, her scar a quiet reminder of the stakes. Clara's hands rested on a table, an unloaded M4 carbine before her. The metal gleamed, polished by years of use, its weight a silent testament to Eli's lessons. She felt the recruits' gazes, heavy as the noon heat, but her voice carried clear and steady. "Sight alignment is about trust," she began, her words deliberate, echoing her brother's cadence. "Trust in your eyes, your hands, your rifle. Misalign by a fraction, and you miss by yards. Get it right, and you hit true every time." She lifted the M4, demonstrating the stance, cheek to stock, eyes level with the sight. Her movements were fluid, practiced, a dance honed in Wyoming fields under Eli's watchful eye. The recruits leaned forward, some scribbling notes, others mimicking her grip. Private Ethan Cole, a lanky 19-year-old with a nervous grin, raised his hand. "Ms. Vance," he said, his voice tentative. "How do you stay steady when the wind's pushing you around?" Clara's lips twitched, a ghost of a smile. She saw Eli in Cole's question, the same hunger to understand, to master the chaos. "You don't fight the wind," she said. "You read it. Watch the grass, the flags, the dust. Adjust your aim, not your focus." She pointed to the range visible through the shed's open door, where wind flags fluttered erratically. "Out there, it's you and the elements. Trust your training to bridge the gap." The recruits nodded, some with skepticism, others with awe. Clara felt a flicker of pride, but it was tempered by the weight of her role. Teaching wasn't shooting. It required patience, clarity, a connection she wasn't sure she could forge. Her brother had been a natural teacher, his laughter easing recruits into confidence. Clara's strength was quieter, forged in solitude, and she wondered if it would be enough. Torres stepped forward, her boots scuffing the concrete floor. "Good start, Vance," she said, her tone clipped but approving. "Now pair them up. Have them practice dry firing in teams. Watch their form. Correct where needed." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. "Hargrove's got eyes on this. Show him you can lead, not just shoot." Clara nodded, her pulse quickening. She divided the recruits into pairs, assigning them positions at mock firing stations. As they fumbled with unloaded rifles, she moved among them, her eyes catching small errors, grips too tight, elbows misaligned. "Relax your shoulders, Private Cole," she said, adjusting his stance with a gentle nudge. "Tension kills precision." Cole nodded, his grin steadier now, and Clara felt a spark of connection, fragile, but real. The session stretched into the afternoon, the shed growing stifling as the sun climbed. Clara's voice grew hoarse, but she pressed on, correcting, encouraging, her brother's lessons flowing through her. Yet doubt lingered, a shadow at the edge of her mind. These recruits were soldiers, bound for wars she'd never fight. Could she truly guide them? A civilian whose only battles were against grief and skepticism? As the session ended, Master Sergeant Roy Cutler appeared at the shed's entrance, his bulk casting a long shadow. His scowl had softened since their first clash, replaced by a grudging respect, but his presence still carried a challenge. "Vance," he said, his voice gruff. "A word." Clara followed him outside, the air cooler but heavy with pine and dust. Cutler crossed his arms, his eyes narrowing. "You're good with a rifle," he said. "Better than most, but teaching's a different beast. These kids need someone who gets the stakes. Combat, not competition. You ever seen a real fight, Vance? Ever felt what it's like when lives are on the line?" The question stung, cutting to the heart of her doubts. Clara's mind flashed to Eli's letters from Fallujah, his words vivid with the chaos of war, sand in his teeth, the crack of enemy fire, the weight of decisions made in a heartbeat. She hadn't seen combat, but she'd lived its aftermath, piecing herself together after his death. "No, Sergeant," she said, her voice low but firm. "I haven't seen combat, but I know what it takes to stay steady under pressure. I know what my brother gave to teach me that. I can pass it on." Cutler studied her, his jaw working. For a moment, silence held them, broken only by the distant hum of a Humvee. Then he nodded, a single, reluctant gesture. "Fair enough, but Hargrove's evaluation isn't just about shooting or teaching, it's about trust. You're an outsider. Prove you belong here, or he'll shut this down faster than you can blink." He turned and walked away, leaving Clara alone with the weight of his words. She looked out at the range, its steel targets glinting like challenges unanswered. The evaluation was more than a test of skill. It was a test of her place in a world that didn't easily bend for civilians. She touched the name tape, Vance, and felt Eli's presence, steadying her. He had trusted her to carry his lessons. Now she had to trust herself to prove it. Back in the shed, Torres gathered the recruits for a debrief, her eyes meeting Clara's with a nod of approval. "They listen to you," she said as the recruits filed out. "That's half the battle, but Cutler's right. Hargrove's looking for a reason to say no. Tomorrow you're running a live fire drill. Full squad, 200 meters, moving targets. You'll call the shots, literally. Ready?" Clara's stomach knotted, but she nodded. "Yes, ma'am." A live fire drill was a leap beyond dry firing. Real bullets, real risks, real consequences. She saw Eli's grin, heard his voice. "You've got this, kid." But the recruits weren't her brother, and Fort Ramsey wasn't a Wyoming field. Failure here could end her chance before it began. As the sun dipped toward the mountains, casting long shadows across the range, Clara lingered, her boots rooted to the earth. The wind carried the scent of gunpowder, sharp and familiar. Tomorrow she'd lead soldiers under Hargrove's scrutiny, her every move a test of her worth. The name Vance burned against her chest, a promise and a burden. She had faced doubt before. Cutler's, the recruits her own. Now, she'd face the fire and prove she could forge trust from skill and silence. The Eagle's Crest range glowed under the early morning sun, its steel targets glinting like accusations across the 200-meter stretch. Clara Vance stood at the firing line, her brother's Marine uniform crisp despite the sweat beading at her temples. The air carried the sharp bite of gunpowder and the faint sweetness of sagebrush, stirred by a restless wind. Today's live fire drill, her first leading a squad of recruits, was no mere test. It was Colonel Hargrove's crucible, designed to expose any crack in her composure, any flaw in her claim to belong at Fort Ramsey. Captain Lena Torres stood beside her, clipboard in hand, her scar a stark line against her jaw. 12 recruits, moving targets, 200 meters, she said, her voice low, steady. "You call the shots, Vance." "They'll follow your lead. Position changes, fire commands, corrections. Hargrove's in the tower with Major Kessler. Cutler's watching, too." "No room for error." Clara nodded, her hazel eyes scanning the recruits lined up behind her. Their faces, young, taut with anticipation, held a mix of trust and doubt. Private Ethan Cole, his nervous grin replaced by a tight-lipped focus, clutched his M4 with white-knuckled intensity. Others, like Private Maria Delgado, a wiry 20-year-old with a steady gaze, seemed ready but wary. Clara felt the weight of their expectations, heavier than the rifle she'd carried yesterday. Eli's voice whispered in her mind. Lead with clarity. They'll follow if you show them the way. She stepped forward, her boots crunching gravel, and raised her voice. Listen up. Moving targets require focus, not speed. Track the motion, lead your shot, and trust your sight picture. Winds 6 miles per hour, right to left. Adjust 1 minute left for every 100 meters. Understood? The recruits nodded, a chorus of yes, ma'am, rippling through the line. Clara's chest tightened at the title. She was no officer, no soldier. But she let it pass, focusing on the task. She pointed to the range where targets slid on mechanical tracks, mimicking the erratic motion of enemies in combat. Prone position first. Fire on my command. Cole, Delgado, you're up first. The recruits dropped to the ground, rifles aligned, bodies tense. Clara paced behind them, her eyes catching every detail. Cole's elbow too high, Delgado's grip too loose. Cole, lower your elbow, she said, her tone firm but calm. Delgado, tighten your hold. Steady. They adjusted, their movements quick but precise, and Clara felt a flicker of relief. They were listening. They were trying. Range is hot, Torres called, her voice cutting through the morning chill. Fire when ready, Vance. Clara took a breath, her pulse steady despite the eyes boring into her from the tower. Fire, she commanded. The range erupted with the sharp cracks of M4s, bullets slicing through the air, targets pinged, some hits clean, others grazing the edges. Clara's gaze darted between the recruits and the targets, her mind calculating. Cole's shots veered right, fighting the wind. Delgado's were tighter, but her pacing was off, rushing the trigger. Cease fire, Clara called after the first volley. She knelt beside Cole, her voice low. You're overcorrecting for wind. Trust the 1 minute adjustment. Breathe through it. She moved to Delgado. Slow your trigger pull. Let the target come to you. The recruits nodded, sweat glistening on their faces, and Clara felt the fragile thread of trust strengthening. The drill continued. Position changes. Kneeling, standing, adding complexity. Clara's commands were crisp, her corrections precise, each word a bridge between her and the recruits. The wind gusted harder, stirring dust that stung her eyes, but she held her focus, Eli's lessons her anchor. See the shot before you take it. By the final volley, the targets bore tight groupings, the recruits' shots reflecting her guidance. Not perfect, but close. Torres lowered her binoculars, her face unreadable but her eyes bright. Solid work, Vance, she said. 80% hit rate, average group size 3 inches. Better than most recruit squads. She glanced toward the tower where Hargrove's silhouette loomed. They're impressed, but Hargrove's still looking for a reason to say no. You're not done yet. Clara nodded, wiping sweat from her brow. The recruits gathered their gear, their murmurs now laced with respect. Cole approached, his grin returning. Thanks, Ms. Vance. That wind trick worked. Never thought about reading the grass before. Clara's lips curved slightly. My brother taught me that. Keep practicing, Cole. He nodded, jogging off, and Clara felt a spark of something new. Pride, not just in herself, but in them. Master Sergeant Roy Cutler approached, his boots heavy on the gravel. His scowl had softened, but his eyes still held a challenge. Not bad, he said, his voice gruff. You got their attention, but leading a drill's one thing, leading in a crisis is another. Hargrove's evaluation includes a simulated combat scenario next week. Live rounds, pop-up targets, time pressure. You ready to call shots when it feels real? Clara's stomach nodded. A combat scenario was uncharted territory. Chaotic, unpredictable, closer to Eli's world than hers. But she saw his face, his steady hands guiding her through a Wyoming storm. "I'll be ready, Sergeant," she said, her voice firm, hiding the doubt gnawing at her core. Cutler studied her, then nodded, a rare gesture of acknowledgement. "We'll see." He turned away, leaving Clara with the weight of his words. The range fell quiet, the wind carrying the faint clatter of targets resetting. Torres joined her, her voice low. "You're building trust, Vance. Recruits, me, even Cutler." "But Hargrove's the final hurdle. He's got a visitor coming, General Elaine Morrow, Pentagon Brass. She's observing the combat scenario." "Impress her and you're in. Falter, and Hargrove will slam the door." Clara's breath caught. A general meant scrutiny beyond Fort Ramsey, a chance to cement her place, or lose it entirely. The name Vance burned against her chest, Eli's legacy urging her forward. She nodded, her eyes on the distant targets. "Understood, ma'am." As Torres walked away, Clara lingered, the sun warming the earth beneath her boots. The combat scenario loomed, a test not just of skill but of nerve, of her ability to lead under pressure that echoed war's chaos. She touched the name tape, grounding herself. Eli had faced death to save others. She would face this to honor him, and to prove she belonged, not just to Fort Ramsey, but to the legacy she carried in her blood. The Fort Ramsey combat simulation range sprawled across a rocky valley, its terrain jagged with boulders and sparse sagebrush, mimicking the harsh unpredictability of a battlefield. Clara Vance stood at the command point, the morning sun casting her shadow long and thin across the dust. Her brother's Marine uniform, now a second skin, bore the faint scent of gun oil and resolve. The air crackled with tension. Live rounds, pop-up targets, and a ticking clock awaited her squad of 12 recruits. Today was no drill. It was Colonel Hargrove's final test, overseen by General Elaine Morrow, a Pentagon official whose presence turned the valley into a crucible. Captain Lena Torres stood beside Clara, her scar stark in the dawn light. "Combat scenario," she said, her voice low, precise. 5 minutes, multiple targets, 100 to 300 meters. You'll call positions, fire commands, and corrections under simulated enemy fire, smoke, noise, movement. Recruits follow your lead. Hargrove's in the tower with Morrow. They're not just watching your shots, they're watching your command." Clara's pulse thrummed, but her face was stone. She glanced at the recruits. Private Ethan Cole, his grin replaced by a tight nod. Private Maria Delgado, her steady gaze a quiet anchor. Their rifles gleamed, their postures taut with trust she'd earned over weeks. Eli's voice echoed, "Lead like you shoot. Clear, steady, true." She touched the name tape, Vance, and felt his strength steady her. This was for him, for them, for herself. Master Sergeant Roy Cutler approached, his boots kicking up dust. His scowl had softened into something closer to respect, but his eyes held a challenge. "Vance," he said, his voice gruff, "this ain't a range exercise, it's chaos. Miss a call and your squad's done." "You sure you're ready for this?" Clara met his gaze, her hazel eyes unyielding. "Yes, Sergeant. I'm ready." Her voice carried a quiet force, forged in Wyoming fields and Fort Ramsey's trials. Cutler nodded, a rare flicker of approval crossing his face, and stepped back. Torres handed Clara a radio headset, its weight a reminder of her role. "You're in charge. Range goes live in 2 minutes. Keep it tight." She stepped away, joining the safety officers at the perimeter. Clara adjusted the headset, her hands steady despite the adrenaline flooding her veins. The recruits lined up, rifles ready, their eyes on her. She felt the weight of their trust, heavier than the M4 she'd wielded days ago. "Range is hot," Torres's voice crackled through the headset. Smoke grenades hissed, cloaking the valley in a gray haze. Speakers blared simulated gunfire, a cacophony of pops and booms that rattled the air. Targets, silhouettes mimicking enemies, popped up at random, 100 meters, 200, 300, their movements erratic. Clara's voice cut through the chaos. "Squad prone position, targets at 150 meters, left sector." "Fire on my mark." The recruits dropped, rifles aligned, their movements sharper than weeks ago. Clara scanned the range, her eyes piercing the smoke. "Winds 4 miles per hour, right to left." "Adjust half a minute left. Fire!" The rifles cracked, a staccato rhythm against the simulated chaos. Targets pinged, some falling clean, others grazed. Clara's mind raced. Cole's shots were high, Delgado's steady but slow. "Cole, lower your aim point," she called, her voice clear over the radio. "Delgado, pace up." "Lead the target." The recruits adjusted, their shots tightening, and Clara felt a surge of pride. They were hers, and they were listening. A new wave of targets popped up at 300 meters, their silhouettes barely visible through the smoke. The timer ticked down, 2 minutes left. Clara's heart pounded, but her commands stayed sharp. "Kneeling position." "Right sector, 300 meters, 1 minute right for wind." The recruits shifted, their movements fluid under her guidance. Shots rang out, pings echoing as targets fell. The smoke thickened, stinging Clara's eyes, but she held her focus. Eli's lessons her North Star. See through the noise. With 30 seconds left, a final target appeared. 300 meters, moving fast. Clara's voice was a blade. "Standing position! Lead the target! 2 minutes right! Fire!" The squad stood, rifles tracking the silhouette. Cole hesitated, his stance wobbling. "Cole, steady your base," Clara snapped. He corrected, fired, and the target pinged, falling. The final buzzer sounded, silence swallowing the chaos. Torres emerged from the smoke, binoculars in hand. Her voice carried to the tower. 92% hit rate, average group size 2.5 inches across all distances, exceptional under combat conditions. The recruits exhaled, some grinning, others staring at Clara with new respect. Cole gave her a thumbs up, Delgado a quiet nod. Clara removed the headset, her hands trembling now that the pressure was gone. She glanced at the tower where Hargrove and Morrow stood, their faces unreadable. Cutler approached, his expression a mix of grudging admiration and lingering doubt. "You pulled it off," he said. "Didn't think you had it in you to command like that, but Morrow's the real test." "She's not here for a show, she's here for answers." Before Clara could respond, Major Diane Kessler appeared, her stride purposeful. "Missy." "Vance," she said, her voice warm but formal. "General Morrow requests you in the command center, now." Her eyes flicked to Torres, then back to Clara. "That was leadership, not just marksmanship. You've got their attention." Clara nodded, her throat tight. She followed Kessler across the range, the sun burning through the smoke, casting sharp shadows. The command center, a low concrete building, smelled of coffee and electronics. General Elaine Morrow sat at a conference table, her silver-streaked hair pulled back, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. At 60, she carried the weight of decades in military intelligence, her presence commanding silence. "Ms. Vance," Morrow said, her voice calm but piercing, "your performance today was extraordinary." "Not just your squad's accuracy, but your ability to lead under pressure. I've read your file, your brother's service, your training, your resolve. The Army's interested in more than your shooting. We're exploring civilian instructor roles for specialized skills. You could shape recruits, maybe even policy, but it's a commitment. Are you prepared for that?" Clara's chest tightened, the weight of opportunity colliding with doubt. She saw Eli's face, his grin after a perfect shot, his belief in her strength. This was beyond his lessons, beyond Fort Ramsey, a chance to forge a legacy of her own. "Yes, ma'am," she said, her voice steady. "I'm prepared. I want to teach, to serve in my own way." Morrow's lips curved, a rare smile. "Good. You'll start with a probationary role under Captain Torres. Pass the final evaluation and we'll formalize it." "Colonel Hargrove?" Hargrove, standing by the window, turned, his flinty eyes softer now. "You've earned a shot, Vance," he said, his tone grudging but sincere. "Don't waste it." Clara saluted, instinct overriding her civilian status. "Thank you, sir, ma'am." As she left the command center, the valley stretched before her, its targets silent witnesses to her triumph. The name Vance burned against her chest, no longer just Eli's but hers. She had led through chaos, earned trust, and opened a door to a future she hadn't dared imagine. But the final evaluation loomed, a shadow cast by Morrow's scrutiny, and Clara knew one truth: the hardest shots were still ahead. The Fort Ramsey parade ground glowed under the late afternoon sun, its grass dusted with the first hints of autumn gold. Clara Vance stood at the center of a small podium, her brother's Marine uniform tailored to her frame, the silver name tape, Vance, catching the light like a beacon. The air carried the crisp scent of pine and the faint echo of gunfire from distant ranges. Today was no ordinary day. It was the formal ceremony marking Clara's appointment as Fort Ramsey's first civilian marksmanship instructor, a role earned through weeks of trials that had transformed her from an outsider to a recognized force. The crowd, soldiers, officers, and a scattering of base families watched in respectful silence. Captain Lena Torres stood to Clara's right, her scar softened by a rare smile. Major Diane Kessler flanked her left, her posture formal but warm. In the front row, Master Sergeant Roy Cutler stood, his once scowling face now etched with grudging admiration. Above them, in the reviewing stand, Colonel Nathan Hargrove and General Elaine Morrow observed, their presence a testament to the weight of Clara's journey. Hargrove stepped to the podium, his silver hair glinting, his voice carrying across the field. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone measured but resonant, "today we honor an extraordinary achievement. Ms. Clara Vance has demonstrated not only exceptional marksmanship, but the leadership and resilience Fort Ramsey demands. Her skills, rooted in the legacy of Captain Eli Vance, have reshaped how we recognize talent, soldier or civilian." The crowd murmured, a ripple of respect. Clara's throat tightened, her hand brushing the name tape. Eli's lessons, see the shot, trust the shot, had carried her here, through Cutler's mockery, Hargrove's skepticism, and her own doubts. She stood taller, her hazel eyes scanning the faces before her, seeing Private Ethan Cole's grin, Private Maria Delgado's steady nod, the recruits she'd trained now carrying her lessons into their own futures. General Morrow approached, her silver-streaked hair catching the sun. At 60, she exuded authority, her eyes sharp with the weight of Pentagon decisions. She held a certificate, its edges crisp, its words formalizing Clara's role. "Ms. Vance," she said, her voice clear, commanding. "Your performance, on the range, in the classroom, under pressure, has set a new standard. The Army values excellence regardless of rank or status. Your role as a civilian instructor will shape recruits and inspire programs across our installations. Congratulations." Clara accepted the certificate, her hands steady despite the emotion swelling in her chest. "Thank you, ma'am," she said, her voice firm but soft. "This is for my brother Eli, and for every soldier who deserves a chance to prove their worth." The words carried a quiet power, echoing the silent strength she'd shown since that first day on the parade ground. The crowd applauded, the sound rolling like thunder across the valley. Torres leaned closer, her voice low. "You did it, Vance. You've earned every bit of this." Kessler nodded, her eyes warm. "This is just the start. You're changing things here, Clara." As the ceremony continued, Clara's gaze drifted to Cutler. He stood apart, his arms crossed, but his nod was unmistakable, a silent acknowledgement of her place, earned through skill and grit. Weeks ago, he'd mocked her as a pretender. Now he'd written a report praising her leadership, a document that had tipped Hargrove's decision in her favor. The change wasn't just in him, it was in the base itself, a shift toward recognizing talent wherever it emerged. The ceremony concluded with a demonstration, Clara leading her squad in a live-fire exercise at 300 meters. The targets fell with precision, each ping a testament to her training and their trust. Cole's shots were tight. Delgado's paced perfectly, their progress a mirror of Clara's own. The crowd watched, rapt, as the sun dipped toward the Colorado mountains, painting the sky with fire. As the range fell silent, Clara stepped back, her boots rooted to the earth. She felt Eli's presence, his grin, his steady hands, woven into every shot, every command. But this moment was hers, too. She had come to honor a memory and found a purpose, a place where her skills could serve beyond herself. The name Vance was no longer just her brother's, it was hers, forged in the crucible of Fort Ramsey. General Morrow approached, her expression softer now, almost maternal. "Ms. Vance," she said, "your work here will ripple beyond this base. The Pentagon's watching. We're developing a national program for civilian instructors, inspired by you. Your brother's legacy lives, but so does yours." Clara's chest swelled, pride and grief intertwined. "Thank you, ma'am. I'll keep earning it." Morrow nodded, stepping back, and Clara turned to her squad, their faces bright with the confidence she'd helped build. Cole saluted, a gesture she returned, her heart full. As the crowd dispersed, Clara lingered, the valley quiet now, the targets still. The wind carried the scent of sagebrush and promise. She touched the name tape, her fingers tracing Vance. Eli had taught her to shoot, to see, to stand firm. Now, she would teach others, carrying his legacy forward while carving her own. Fort Ramsey had doubted her, tested her, and finally embraced her. The hardest shots were behind her, but the future stretched wide, a range of possibilities she was ready to claim.